welcome to episode number 227 of the ETPHD Team Podcast with myself and Denai. Hi Denai, how are you?
I am really good, thank you. How are you doing?
I am great, thank you. And Anna, how are you?
I am all good, thank you.
Great. We've had so much commotion. This is our 18th time trying to start this podcast, so congratulations to us. It bodes extremely well for the rest of the podcast. Our brains are on. Our brains are on. It's just technology. That's all it is. Okay. Anyone have anything wildly exciting they want to share before we start with the questions?
I mean, it's wildly exciting for me and maybe for fellow horse riders, but I still call them lessons. I should probably call them like training session to make it sound like I actually know what I'm doing, which I do. But we brought in some like mindfulness and breathwork, and it was really, really cool because basically, obviously, I do dressage, which is like the horse dancing, and you get judged. And I was letting like, if you're in a competition, you get judged and you get marks on certain movements. And like my trainer today was like, you're letting like silly things just slip, and you're like riding really tense. And I think and it makes the horse tense because they pick up on how you're feeling. And she was like, what I want you to try and do is just really focus on your breath, and then you'll relax, and then he'll relax. And I was like, I know this, but why don't I do it when I like it? And it made the world of difference. And that was really cool. So that's my exciting thing for me today.
I like that a lot. It is funny, I think, with mindfulness, because you think about it in terms of your food and you think about it in terms of your body and like and your stress management, but it is interesting, like the bits of our world that we don't incorporate in. Like my big one of that was sex. Like I never thought about mindfulness during sex, and I mean there's a whole load of conditioning in there in the sense of like, oh well, it's performative and it's not about me and all of these things. But once you overcome all of that disgusting misogynistic undertone, I still never thought about like, okay, how can I be present in this moment? How can I, like, it was never like that. And for me, when I started becoming more mindful and I read a book about tantric sex, I can't remember what it was called, it's like the art of tantric sex or something like that, I think we've spoken about it before. And then I was like, oh, this just makes everything 10 times easier.
Yeah.
We should really be teaching this to 16-year-olds, or in sex ed whenever that occurs. But yeah, funny. So pleased for you.
Thanks.
Your horse.
Yeah, I'm sure he likes the fact that I'm not just like this tense ball of, I don't know, anger.
Okay, shall we get started on the questions? Anna, do you want to go first?
Yes, let's keep on theme. Is there a particular reason why some yoga/meditation says to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth, and then others both through the nose, or is it just preference?
I have to say that I don't know of a specific reason, that I'm not 100% sure that I'm right on this, but in terms of all of my training, I've never come across a specific reason why. I think breathwork facilitators say, like, in terms of oxygen extraction and stuff, it's slightly different when you breathe in through the nose as opposed to breathing in through the mouth, but that's both in, which is why you always breathe in through your nose. And then in terms of blowing off carbon dioxide and that kind of process, I'm not sure if there's a difference between blowing out your nose and blowing out your mouth. I think the main reason, so again, I'm not a breathwork facilitator, but I think the main reason in terms of meditation teacher training, some people use the mouth, is because it helps sometimes people prolong the exhale a little bit. It can encourage a bit more of a feeling of like relaxation and release and letting go, and it can be a bit more of an active process where you're releasing, and that one of the reasons we focus on that out breath, that exhale, is that kind of release of relaxing into the floor, that type of situation. So I think that when it's through the mouth, you get a bit more of that exaggerated active process. That would be why I would do it as a meditation teacher with my training. But again, in terms of breathwork, there's so much complexity in terms of like progressive breath work and the more advanced stuff, that I know that there's certain ratios of breaths, like in terms of time in and nose and mouth breathing, that I am not aware of. So that's maybe one for a breathwork facilitator if there's something more to it.
I was just thinking, because I don't know if you've done this in any of your breathwork, but there were some bits that I was looking at when I was kind of looking at hypo and hyper arousal and sensitivity, and what you can do to either kind of upregulate and downregulate. And one of them being like, I'm going to get this the wrong way around, but if you want to upregulate, it's breathe in through one nostril, and downregulate is the other one. So I'm just wondering if it, again, something like that, whether it, I'm trying to think what I do at the start of, I don't know, but yeah.
I think you're right. And like having, I don't know about the nostril side of things, but in terms of like having obviously the prolonged inhale versus the prolonged exhale, the down regulation is prolonged exhale, up regulation is prolonged inhale, and it's probably, you are right, there's probably something in that too. I've realized that so I need a nose job. I don't know if I've announced that on the podcast yet, but I need a second nose job, which is, congrats to me. It's a really good time because of my sinus problems. And I realised like maybe a lot of my problems with breath work and why it makes me feel anxious is because I actually can't breathe through one of my nostrils. And I've never really realised that I couldn't properly breathe through my nostrils. So when I'm doing like that one nostril breathing and stuff like that, like, no bloody wonder it makes me feel anxious. I'm suffocating.
Yeah.
Like, is this normal? Good to know. Okay, today question, go for it.
So this is from Steph's client. I'm currently reading Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. So thank you to Emilia for the recommendation. I also read 4,000 Weeks and loved that. What would your top nonfiction book recommendations be?
I feel like we've probably given these quite a few times. So you've kind of said two of mine. I'm currently reading a really lovely book, actually, which I've not finished it yet, so I don't know if it would be my top non-fiction book, but I'm currently reading a book called Conversations on Love, which whenever I post a little bit of it on my Instagram story, people ask me what it is, which usually means that it's a book that a lot of people would like. So I would recommend that. It's about love, but not necessarily romantic love. All types of love. And actually, on that note, if you're somebody who's single, The Joy of Being Single is a fantastic book too. Especially maybe if you're newly single and you're maybe struggling with that, but that's a really great book.
Yeah, I love that book. It's such a great combination of kind of stating the stats, but also lots of humor and having a good laugh as well. Within the dating topic, one book, I mean, Attached, we've recommended quite a few times if someone is interested in that, or another one that sounds so cheesy. It's called Dating Deeply by Ken Page. But it's one of the most interesting relationship books I've read because it's not just to romantic relationships, any kind of relationships, but it gets you to think about your core gifts and what it is that you bring to that relationship, as opposed to perhaps the traditional dating book. Oh, these are the top tips to kind of go on a date. What I really like, there's a book called Mindset by Carol Deck, if I say her name correctly, that I found really helpful when I read it back in the day for people that struggle with kind of being kind to yourself when you're making mistakes, kind of being stuck in perfectionism, and Black Box Thinking, which I cannot remember the title, but again, very much about people that want to kind of redefine their relationship with failure and stuff.
Nice. Yeah, Carol Dweck talks a lot about like growth and fixed mindset, doesn't she? And if you struggle with that type of fixed mindset of this is just how I am, this is just how things are harder for me, I'm rubbish at that, all of these types of narratives in that book is a great one.
I mean, I'm not going to say, because I've not finished it, so I don't feel like I can recommend it either way yet, but I am enjoying, I'm a few chapters in to If Women Rose Rooted, and it's like on authenticity and belonging. So, I mean, it's not Brené, but it's pretty good so far.
Nice. I mean, it's definitely on brand, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like that. And then
if I remember,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, if I remember correctly, you and me recorded a whole podcast on kind of top book recommendations that might be worth checking out for whoever asked that question?
I don't know if I did.
Or did I just dream about
I've done quite a lot of Instagram posts about it, but you obviously can't search Instagram, so it's not ideal. Obviously anything by Glennon Doyle is I think I think with books like from like authors like Glennon Doyle and Brené Brown and things, both of whom I love, you can get lost in them, and you can kind of just keep reading them over, and then a lot of the messages can sometimes be the same. And I think it's really important to challenge yourself with like nonfiction books, to have some like different offers on the same topic, like that one you were saying, Anna. But then also challenge yourself with books that are not necessarily aligned with what you totally agree with, like challenge your biases a little bit. I sometimes get some nice recommendations from Emma that are more kind of on the harder side of things, and I tend to do this more with podcasts, where I listen to podcasts with people that I think you're not my type of business person, or you're not my type of thinker, but I find it really helpful to challenge me to think in a different way. So I think that when you're looking for nonfiction books, be mindful of just picking the same ones that are kind of, well, these are all aligned and they all say the same thing, because one, it's boring, but two, like you never really get that growth from them.
Yeah.
Okay. George's client's question: summer body image ? Coping with comparisons on the beach ? I would like to put a disclaimer out here and say that last week's podcast on Monday was all about summer body image and the fluctuations we see in body image throughout the year. So definitely listen to that podcast if you haven't already. Does anybody want to jump in on this one?
I think making sure that what you're wearing in the summer on the beach in general is something that you feel comfortable in. And like when it comes to comparisons, I think having like in your head conversation with yourself as to like, what's the story that you're telling yourself? Why are you thinking maybe that their body's better, and do you know what's going on for them? Because we know that looking at someone else's body, we don't know anything about their health, their happiness, relationship with food, exercise, body, anything like that. They might also be struggling, but you have kind of put them on a pedestal. So yeah, I think it's catching yourself when you're caught in comparison and just checking in, reminding yourself you don't actually know what's going on. And equally, I think obviously you're doing the work with Georgia, and I think often, like for me, it's like, if not that I often compare myself anymore, but would I be willing to give up everything just to look like them or have what they have? I'm like, no, my life's pretty sweet, I'm okay.
Mm-hmm. I think like not everyone who's lean has, okay, a lot of people who are lean do not have relationship with food issues, and a lot of people who are in larger bodies don't have relationship with food issues, and anything in between, right? We can't make any judgments based on body size. From a personal experience, just me, I'm not saying this is everyone else, when I was leaner versus when I'm like, again, I know that I'm still in a societally accepted size of body, etc., right? But I know that when I was leaner and I was more preoccupied by food, I did not enjoy my photos. I did not enjoy like the days as much. I definitely didn't enjoy the food as much as I do now. Slightly bigger and not preoccupied by these things. So I think like if you are finding yourself comparing, like you said, when you're talking about like you don't know like what situation they're in, of course you can't assume that just because they're leaner they are A, better, or B, worse, or healthier or unhealthier, any of these things. But like the reality is, for a lot of people, like that is the case. I've seen a lot of identical reels recently from people who are talking about like female influencer types, sort of saying, when you get to the beach and you realize that literally nobody looks like what they said on Instagram, or what they look like on Instagram, or what I thought, or something like that. And it's so true. I do think when you get out of the Instagram world and the social media world and you go into real life and you go to a beach, if you look around you, literally nobody looks like an Instagram influencer or fitness person. Nobody does. And even the most fitness people, I mean, I suppose I'm excluding people like bodybuilders and people potentially with like on performance enhancing drugs and things like that. But realistically, all bodies on the beach are like, I do think I've got to the point where I think all bodies on the beach are just beautiful, and they're so different and diverse and incredible. And I like to, when I'm on a beach, like I like to look at everyone and I like to look at their families, and everyone's just, I just think I like to guess their stories and like look at them laughing and focusing on, I like to focus on one, myself and my book usually, but two, if I am looking at other people, I try and find like the joy and like the experiences that they're having. You can choose to focus on these things, or you can choose to focus on like what someone looks like on the beach, because realistically, your comparison with your own body image is coming from like you judging other people as well as you judging yourself. So what's amazing about that is that you can choose not to do that. You can replace those thoughts with something different, and that's an incredible skill that you can develop.
Yeah. And the thing I was thinking while you were speaking is that a sign that maybe your relationship with yourself and your own self-worth needs a little bit of work, right? Because yes, you could change your body and be in a leaner body or whatever, but you may still experience an urge to compare yourself to other people, and you may always perceive someone that's prettier having a better body than you, or whatever that might be, if we don't kind of tend inwards to actually work on our own insecurities and build confidence outside of just your appearance. And I think that's really important. But we started the podcast by talking about mindfulness, and I think that's the main thing I work with clients during the summer while on the beach. And I love what you said. It's a choice to direct your attention to something else that's much more meaningful.
Someone asked me a question on Instagram yesterday, and they said, why do I still want to be leaner, even though, like, this is, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but why do I still want to be leaner, even though the body type that I want is not leaner? And I thought that was so interesting and such great awareness, because I was like, my answer was very much like, well, you're associating being lean with something other than aesthetics. Then if it's, you still want to be leaner, even though you like the look of not being leaner, then it's because of, you think leaner means more successful, more attractive, more lovable, more disciplined, whatever it is. And the likelihood is that you're looking for something that you feel like you're lacking in your life at the moment. So you're looking into your body for that, even though objectively it's not about like what you perceive to be attractive. I thought that was really, really interesting. It's kind of off topic, but it was a great question.
Yeah.
Okay, Anna.
Can being vegan/vegetarian affect HA recovery? I was told by a professional it may be worth adding some dairy back into my diet to help with this, which is why I've done that. I know the cause of my HA is from overtraining in the past, but I can't help notice I lost my period around the same time I went veggie around 7 to 8 years ago. I'm happy to have a bit of dairy, but I'm not prepared to ever eat meat or eggs again.
It's not directly related. The reason that they've recommended dairy probably is, one, it's a great source of calories, protein, vitamin B, and that's often what we lack as vegetarians, especially vegans. But predominantly with dairy, you're getting calcium, and with HA, your bones are at risk. And one of the best things you can do is consume food sources of calcium, and then also consume or consume a vitamin D supplement, or get vitamin D from the sun, ideally, probably a bit of both. So that's realistically probably what they've done, which is great to hear doctors giving out decent medical advice. The reason that you probably lost your period around that time is because that's probably when you became more conscious of your food, and probably maybe then often alongside of that is when your exercise probably increased. There's no direct association between those things, but often we see with veg, like when sometimes people, this is not you necessarily, but sometimes we go vegetarian or vegan as a new way to control our diet, and it's like that kind of, oh, well, it's a healthy way to do that. And so all of the tendencies that can come with that, like a bit more rigid around food choices, and a bit more like stressy, and a bit more food preoccupied, and potentially managing your calorie intake, or just your calorie intake getting lower, those things are coming alongside of that sometimes. So it'll just be a coincidence that all of those things kind of happened. Well, no, it's not a coincidence that those things happened at the same time, but it's correlation, not causation in this case. There's be no mechanistic link for that to happen. Is that any question?
Why emotional eating? How to handle this? Anything else than sitting and breathing and asking questions? Any other tool?
I find this one really, I mean, it's a bit like the self-soothing question. And obviously we can all list what we do to help ourselves, but ultimately, like, sitting with what you're feeling initially, whilst it is the hardest thing to do, it allows you to get curious as to what it is that's going on for you, so that you can then kind of, along with who you're working with, can find the tools to support you, because it's going to look different it's going to look different for everybody, but it's going to look different depending what it is that you're feeling. Because I know for me, when I feel stressed, I need something different to when I feel anxious, and likewise when I just want some comfort. The go-to might always be for food, but each of those things, if I'm actually meeting that feeling, meeting that need, is going to look very different. So that's like going around and not really answering the question, but ultimately it is sitting with it, finding out what's going on, whipping out your feelings wheel, and then going from there.
Yeah, I think if you look at like why we emotionally eat, the underlying contributing factor in any theory of emotional eating is emotional dysregulation. So when we're looking at emotional dysregulation, what does that involve? It means difficulty in identifying our emotions, being able to name our emotions and regulate our emotions adequately, name them, describe them, meet our needs, etc. So that is what all of this work around emotional eating that you're doing with, I think it was Georgia, was it? Rosalind, while you're doing all of this work, it's all centered around this, because that is the underlying cause of your emotional eating. And there are different ways to do this. The main one is the self-awareness. It is mindfulness. Again, if you look at any emotional eating intervention, mindfulness and is one of the main foundations of that. Also distress tolerance, so being able to sit with your emotions and tolerate these uncomfortable feelings and emotions is another key thing, which is what you're doing in terms of sitting with them and breathing through them and recognizing that you can't sit with them. So realistically, there are so many different tools that you can use, surfing the urge, and we've got some DBT tools within the ETPHD method that I'm sure you'll go through, but they're all developing the same thing, is developing your emotional regulation. I think the only other thing on top of that is like the more bottom-up approaches of like, well, mindfulness is that, but like things like the somatic approach too, of sometimes it can be difficult to pause and to get out of your own head. So getting into your body can be really helpful first. That's really important. But I think one thing I want to note is it sounds like maybe you're a little bit resistant to these things, or you're kind of looking for the next thing already. And actually, sometimes it's a case of doing the stuff that we don't really love to do, that we don't see immediate results from, and doing it over and over again, probably longer than we feel comfortable with, and making this a practice. I don't think that responding, not reacting to things and taking a pause and things like that, I don't think that once you've learned how to do that, you will always do that. It's a constant practice. You're constantly doing meditation. You're constantly having mindful moments. You're constantly practicing mindful eating forever, so that you can continue to practice this muscle. Just like you can't do yoga and touch your toes the first time. If you then did yoga and you got to a place where you're like, oh, my downward dog is great and all these things, and then you never did yoga again, 2 years later, you wouldn't be able to touch your toes again. It's a thing that you constantly have to practice to get to that point. But it becomes much easier and much more enjoyable as time goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. What I was thinking here as well is a lot of times we go to food because we want to just escape and run away from what we're feeling and just instantly feel better, right? And sometimes what can happen is we can use the tools to replace the food, as like we're going to use the tool to kind of get rid of the emotion, as opposed to using it as a means to learn to sit with the emotion. And sometimes, some of my clients have come to that realization, oh, this is not working for me, it's not making me feel better, because the intention is to get rid of the feeling rather than actually to learn to work through it. So that would be the only thing I would add there. Just being mindful that, all of those tools are helping you move through and experience in a much more gentle, loving way, as opposed to I'm trying to actually find a quick fix to feel better right away.
Okay, Denai, this is your question. I feel like if I feel my feelings and become a more emotional person, my entire personality would change. I am pretty logical in other parts of my life, food not so much. So how do I navigate a possible big shift in who I am? I want to feel my feelings and become more mindful. Maybe the logical male/male energy is part of me, of my turning away from myself. I am not sure, but it is definitely a little bit scary. Can't relate. Hard can't relate.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, can definitely relate. And I think like embrace, lean into the unease at the moment, because I think what you're maybe imagining is going to happen isn't necessarily going to be the case. I mean, like we spoke on the last episode about like the how people view compassionate coaching and this really soft, airy fairy, because we allow ourselves to feel our feelings and all of that, but that's not the case. And I don't think speaking for myself, like doing all of this work, I think, yes, I'm a lot more in tune with myself and I feel all my feelings, but I don't think I've particularly changed in myself, if that makes sense. Like personality trait wise is still very much the same, but I think the unknown is well, naturally it's scary, but I don't think it's going to be this big shift that maybe you think is going to happen.
I think imagine a part of yourself that just hasn't been like broken open yet, and actually this work is simply easily about to break this part of you open. And it's not going to remove any other parts of you. It's just, apart from like maybe your dysfunctional eating habits, well, definitely your dysfunctional eating habits, but it's going to create a more fuller you. So you're still going to have all of those logical traits, but you're also going to have this whole other colorful, creative, compassionate, mindful side of you that is going to create just a much bigger you, stronger, more soulful, softer you, but you're still going to have all of those other qualities. And I think thinking about like, why do you want to cling on to this logical part? I think for me personally, I know that I identified with this logical, scientific, independent, strong woman, and that certainly stopped me from feeling into all of these other things. But because I thought that's what I should be, I thought that that was driving my success. I thought that that was the reason that I was running my business the way that I was and had my PhD and all of these things. And realistically, none of those things were the reason why I was achieving. I was achieving because I was ambitious, but like in my soul, I was doing things that aligned with what was important to me. And that's why I achieve, because these things are important to me and I want to do them. And the softness means that when I balls up, which I often will do, the emotional side of me can reflect on that, feel that, and move forwards without being completely impacted by that, dysregulated, struggle to get quote unquote back on track in terms of the progress that I'm making, whatever aspect of my life that is. So I think like it's totally understandable. But you also, I suppose, on top of that, like you are none of these actions. You are your soul, and these are personality traits. And personality traits like may stay forever. Some they may not. But who you are underneath all of that stuff is still the same person. It's just that maybe your habits will change, and the way that you show up sometimes will change, but in the most authentic way. All you're doing is tapping into a bit of you that is there. You just are not tapping into you yet, and you would be doing yourself a big disservice if you got to the point of 95 years old and there was a whole part of your personality that you'd never shown to the world and you'd never even shown to yourself. Because like, imagine what that could be like, and you just don't know yet. Like, you could just flourish into this, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Butterfly. Not the word I was looking for, but I feel like it works. And you just don't know that that's going to come yet.
Yeah. And it kind of follows from the previous question as well, right? Because I think we see quite a lot in our clients. I mean, I've experienced personally, sometimes, we use kind of coping mechanisms to distract ourselves from how we feel in the short term, for example, like food, because we don't trust ourselves that we'll be capable to handle these feelings. For example, the fear could be, I'm going to lose a part of myself that has really supported me throughout life, for example, that much more logical part in that case. I think a matter of trust that all of these parts can coexist of you, that who make you you in the end, but it's on the whole of you, the logical part, right? So it's just how essentially creating a balance, and a lot of what you're saying kind of coming back home to yourself. And I think that ties a lot with the toxic positivity side of things, that people nowadays are like, oh, you should always be grateful, you should always find a silver lining in things, essentially completely brushing over the emotions that you actually need to process to be able to then actually find the silver lining and forward.
Here's the question too. Why do you think potentially, and I don't know if you do or not, but why do you feel that that kind of logical, like masculine sort of energy, like you said, is better? What stories are you telling yourself about the quote unquote feminine, whatever you think about kind of these traits, right? What stories are you telling yourself about the softer, kinder, more emotional being? And because sometimes there's a bit of, and we all have some of this in us, I think, a bit of internalized misogyny. And I wonder if any of this is kind of a bit of internalized misogyny on your part. And like I like to say, we've certainly all got this, and I'm always constantly challenging myself on that one. But maybe there's an element of like, you think that side, that stuff is weaker, and then challenging yourself on that. I think Adam Grant does some cool stuff around this. Maybe his podcast with Brene, I'm not sure, but maybe delving into like feminist literature and some reading around like the strengths of the power of vulnerability and authenticity, and this quote unquote softer stuff, which is actually often harder to manage and to deal with, but something to think about. Anna, go for it.
The start of this question is it normal? But I feel like it's maybe, is it okay? Is it normal to have both physique goals, but to also feel content and thankful in the body that you have?
For sure. Yeah, people think that if you're content in your body that you're never going to want it to look any different, and that might be the case. You might just appreciate your body and love her for what she allowed, but it's kind of like saying you're never going to want to change your hair color again. Like, I'm really grateful that I'm not bald, but it doesn't mean that I'm not starting to go blonde again because I like blonde hair. Like, and I mean, your body is not something to be kind of just twisted and turned and pushed to its limits for an aesthetic goal. I don't think that that's the case, but like, can you have an aesthetic goal in a healthy way? For sure. Whose theory is it? Gestalt's theory. And the paradoxical theory of change is the idea that like only when you're content with you are you then able to change. And he's not talking about bodies, or they're not talking about bodies, but it's I quite like that.
I think there's a bit like the misconception that people think working with us, like if you're working to improve your relationship with food, that you're never going to diet again. And it's a bit like that. If you're working on your relationship with your body, it's not to say that you're never going to want to change it at some point. I mean, still desperately trying to grow some glutes. I mean, it doesn't happen, but but we can try. And I think, like you said, it's making sure the checking in with the intent behind it always, isn't it? And I know this client well. We've worked together for years now, and she has done so much work on her body image and how she feels in herself, that there's nothing wrong with wanting to, I mean, we're working on strength at the moment. There's nothing wrong with wanting to build a bit of muscle and tone up.
I said to the coach that I'm getting to do my training, I said, like, I've got zero aesthetic goals. I don't want any input on my nutrition. I don't like, all of that's fine. Nothing at all. I said, but the disclaimer that I'll make is that I really value my arse and I don't want it to get any smaller. And ideally I would like it to get bigger. And he's like, okay, noted. And I'm like, I love respect my body. I'm happy with the way my body looks. All of these things, I'm at peace with it, with her. But I'm still like, no, my arse still matters. Still want the man in my life to be like, your arse looks bigger. Apparently it does, by the way. Buzzing off my tits. Apparently it's got bigger. And do you know what? That's a body compliment. And do you know what? I'll take it. Because sometimes we do, because we're human beings and it feels nice.
Exactly, absolutely. And I think there's so much anti-diet messaging online that people then start to shame themselves for wanting to have those body composition goals, which is as equally unhelpful as diet culture, because both tell you what you should do, right? You should choose what you think is best for you. And you've done all of this amazing work, which puts you in a really great place of resilience, because you can have body composition goals without your worth being attached to those goals. And I think that's the biggest game changer, because it's a whole different type of energy that you bring into kind of working towards achieving them.
Right, question.
So this is from Becca's client. If no foods are forbidden and we have unconditional permission to eat, is it wise to really eat whatever I want whilst I'm still getting used to intuitive eating? Coming off the back of dieting, I don't trust myself that I will really be able to regulate myself if I eat something delicious and sugary, and I worry I will binge or eat way more than I should. For example, if I brought 4 chocolate muffins, I worry I wouldn't be able to stop at 1. Is it better not to buy these foods until I feel more in control, or do you have any tips for being able to eat your favorite things in moderation?
I think I would always ask yourself, well, how would you feel if you don't buy the muffins? If you don't have them in the house, is it just going to be one of those things that builds up in your head, and then eventually when you do allow yourself to have them, it is a mindless eating episode? And for me, that would be a case of, right, well, I need to work on my relationship with them and make sure that I do include them frequently and build that trust in myself, and my body build the trust in me that I can have these things regularly without overeating on them. And I'm not sure with that question if the client's like dieted with Becca or working with Becca's coming off the back of a diet. But either way, I think if that's the case, off the back of a diet, when your hunger hormones are going a little bit haywire, again, making sure that you are including these foods, but still including volume foods as well, so that you're getting that taste, that satisfaction, but also the fullness, just while everything regulates again.
Yeah, something I want to touch on is it really wise to eat whatever I want? There's this huge misconception with unconditional permission to eat, which is like, I'll just eat whatever I want whenever I want, and realistically that's not what it is. Unconditional permission to eat falls within, like, there's multiple constructs to improving your relationship with food and becoming more intuitive, and it involves honoring your health. So when you're looking at unconditional permission to eat, it's like, okay, well, I really want this donut, so I'm going to have this donut, but you know what, I'm going to have it this afternoon when I normally have my kind of large snack in the afternoon, but I'm going to have it with protein shake and some fruit. And then I've got like a really inclusive meal. I can enjoy the food that I want, I'm managing my hunger, and I get all the benefits of all of this food. And then I move on, and I'm going to enjoy it mindfully without judgment. These things all come into play. It's not, I really want a donut, oh, I really want another donut and another donut, so I'm just going to keep having these things. That being said, well, the kind of before I go on to that, like, sometimes when you're trying to do this stuff yourself, this is where you can start to struggle, because you find yourself consistently overeating on these foods because you often don't balance. You don't have that fierce accountability, because you think, because some of the diet messaging, anti-diet messaging is so stupid, you think it just means that, you know, if you want the donut, have the donut all the time. Like, that's what it is. That's because not what it is. You have to look at it in the overall construct of supporting your health. But that being said, there is an exploration phase of intuitive eating where you start to rediscover your enjoyment of food again. And if you've restricted these foods for a long time, then because of the restriction, you are likely going to overeat on them initially, sometimes. The answer is not to restrict them again, or otherwise you're constantly going to find yourself overeating. The answer is to remove the restriction and allow yourself that. And over time, know that the novelty of those foods is going to wear off. If I hadn't had donuts for a year and then you brought me crosstown donuts, Anna, or whatever, like I would want all of the donuts. I'd be like, I want to taste them all, I want to have them all. But if I'd had donuts every other week for the last year, and then you brought crosstown donuts, I'd be like, oh yeah, like that one looks new. I've not had that one. I'm going to have a taste of that. And then I'm going to have a taste of that one because I've not had those ones before. The mentality is completely different, but you cannot get to the latter stage until you've done the former stage if you've come from a restrictive background. So yes, it will feel uncomfortable. And yes, you might find yourself overeating a little bit on these foods. But the answer is not going to go backwards and stop having these foods at all. But if you really are struggling with the introduction of them, then doing things like, okay, say it's donuts. Okay, well, for starters, I'm going to enjoy a donut. Every time we go for coffee, I'm going to have a donut when we're hanging out together. Okay, now I'm going to allow myself to bring one of those donuts home with me. And then I'm going to, over time, start introducing these more regularly. And then eventually I'll feel like I can trust myself to have a bag of donuts or a box of donuts in the fridge from the weekend that I don't necessarily have to eat. But it's a stepwise process.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, I think the values are really important here. I mean, Becca has created a whole resource on identifying your values. And I think the moment we can align our food choices with our values, as opposed to constantly coming perhaps from that old mentality of what should I eat, what can I eat, right? That can feel very, very restrictive, or feel like you're free for all if suddenly someone is giving you unconditional permission to eat, and that means, oh my God, I can finally enjoy all of those foods I wasn't able to eat. But okay, I have that choice. What are my values at the same time? Why do I value my health? How do I want to be feeling day to day? How is eating 4 muffins on the go going to make me feel in an hour from now? So again, it has nothing to do with dieting or aesthetics or your body composition. It's just all about your actual feelings and honoring how you want to feel on today.
This is making me so hungry, So if you don't know, I'm in Austin now, and I got my everything bagels, which is my favorite thing, one of my favorite things in the world. But then when I was in Trader Joe's yesterday, I was like, I need some like cream cheese or something for them. Couldn't find the cream cheese. You know what I got? Baby Bell, like found them in the this is just great. Like all of this different food, and it's all great. But you know what? My fridge is filled with all of these different things, and just at the back there, Bell, I'm actually can't wait. I might have some for breakfast. Okay, techniques to help you pause before binge eating or overeating. It's mindless. So how do you break that cycle?
I'm just running through the STOP acronym in my head, just trying to think.
So we do have a whole podcast on binge eating, right? I think that would be definitely worth checking that episode out. I think the main thing I would say first and foremost, sometimes we think, oh, I have an urge to binge it, I need to do something else instead. When actually the first thing is incorporating a tool that can actually help regulate your emotions. So that's where I always suggest something like breathing or meditation, because that can help add that pause that you need to calm that, kind of regulate that. It's almost like an anxious feeling that we have in that moment, to then be able to actually check in with yourself and see what it is that's going on, what you need. Sometimes when we're in the midst of the urge or the emotion, it's really hard to think clearly. So having some go-to things that you do to give yourself space, as much space as you can do. And initially, in the initial stages of recovery, it could be a matter of just increasing the space between the urge and your actions, and just getting comfortable with tolerating the discomfort that comes with the urge. I mean, Emilia mentioned earlier the Surf the Urge. It's a tool that we use with our clients, which it's a lot easier said than done, of course, but with time and a lot of practice, you do learn to trust yourself that urge, it's temporary and you can move through it.
Yeah, so listen to episode 203, because we speak specifically in there about stopping mid-binge. That was with Anna and myself. And listen to episode number 170, Overcoming Binge Eating Essentials. Both of those will be super, super helpful for you. Rather than talk in the moment stuff, I would say that meditation day to day is one of the best things that you can do here. Meditation is the fundamental groundbreaking thing, realistically, or mindfulness practice, because I know some people don't love meditation, but realistically, that consistent practice is the thing that helps you respond, not react. Viktor Frankl quote, that one that I always talk about, between stimulus and response, there's space, and in that space lies our power to choose. And there's always something else that I forget the end of it. But the reality is, meditation allows you to cultivate that space, whether it be before you binge eat, before you react to somebody who makes a stupid comment, before you send that email, before you text that person. The ability to stop is incredible. And realistically, mindfulness practice, meditation practice is the one game-changing thing that for most people is supportive. And I know that some people have struggles with meditation and things, and there are other ways around meditation than just sitting meditating. But all of the tools in the moment are really, really helpful, but you need to be looking at the day-to-day stuff as well.
I think absolutely, in terms of meditation, I think it's one of those things that people don't necessarily realize at the beginning how much of an impact it has in life, day-to-day life. But I think going back to in the moment, like obviously everything Denai was saying, absolutely creating that pause is so important. But I think often we say it, and like, it is genuinely one of the hardest things, particularly at the start of this journey, that you have to practice. And I think making it as easy as you can to pull yourself out of autopilot. It might even be like when you're in the kitchen, having a post-it note on the cupboard just to take a moment and breathe, or moving those foods to a different place in the kitchen. So again, you're having to pull yourself out and go, right, I'm actually having to look for this. Is that enough for me to stop for a moment and choose a different action? Just making it, like I said, as simple, not as simple, but as easy as possible to be able to do something to create a pause.
And just keeping in mind that when you're in that fight or flight state before you binge or overeat, your cognitive function is not optimal, and it's difficult to make a decision, which is why we always recommend some sort of grounding, breath work, somatic work, moving your body, using temperatures, etc. Anything that you can utilize to reduce that sympathetic dominance, reduce that fight or flight mode, so that those parts of your brain that are activated kind of relax is not the right word, but they become, not, I guess deactivated the right word, potentially, but then anyway, you remove that sympathetic dominance, and so you're able to think more clearly and then make a decision. Because that's one of the reasons it's so hard to make a decision in the moment, is because these parts of your brain are activated and you're not thinking clearly, which is why afterwards you're like, why did I just do that? Like, why did I just make that decision? It's like you weren't thinking properly because of that nervous system dysregulation.
Any tips for shift workers with regard to routine, exercise, sleep, diet whilst on night shifts?
I would like to first of all refer you to Michelle Carroll, her Instagram page. Michelle is fantastic, and she does a lot of work around people who are shift workers, or she puts out some great content around shift workers. So definitely recommend that you go and follow her. I follow her, so if you look to who I follow, Michelle Carroll, you'll find her. Realistically, like, we can't deny that there are negative health outcomes associated with shift work, and it sucks. Because often people who are doing shift work too are just doing the most incredible, important jobs, and it's really unfair. And some of the reasons for that is that we do get like shifts in our fuel use and our metabolism. I don't mean metabolic rate, but I mean like our overall metabolism during the day and overnight. So for example, we have reduced insulin sensitivity later in the day and overnight. And so our ability to kind of metabolize carbohydrates shifts slightly overnight. And so if you're shift work and then you're eating predominantly most of your calories over that time, there can be potentially negative health outcomes, which is frustrating. And like if I had somebody doing shift work and I could just put you in a room and say, eat this, you are a robot, do things like this, I would say probably try and have predominantly protein overnight and maybe some fats in there, and then have your carbohydrates earlier in the day, in terms of the circadian day, the 24 o'clock, whatever, I don't know what the right phrase is, but like having your carbohydrates and things more in the daytime. That is what I would recommend in terms of just what potentially might be the most helpful thing to do. And if you can, when you're working in your overnight shift, get movement in there to support yourself. If you're maybe a nurse or you're working for the NHS or something, then you've probably got a lot of movement anyway. But if you're like, I don't know, like a driver or something that drives overnight, that's going to be a more difficult. Can you have like exercise snacks in somewhere that allows you just to move? Because when it like just like what insulin does, but via a different pathway, exercise does. So it helps with blood glucose control and taking glucose into our muscles and tissues. And so if we've got reduced insulin sensitivity, it's like, okay, well, what else can we do to support ourselves? So again, in an ideal world, if you're in just like this room where I can say, do this, do that, then I would recommend doing those things. But then on top of that, it's like, you're not in a room with no office treats and complete autonomy over your time and all of these things. Like that just doesn't happen. So it's then thinking about, okay, well, what are my challenges to doing these things, and how can I support myself with these in terms of, you know, being more mindful at work and things like that. So like that would be my, I suppose, recommendations, alongside all of the usual helpful habits and nutrition strategies that we would recommend day to day for anyone that's looking to improve their health. Okay, one last question. Did I go for it?
So how to resist the additional treats put in a staff room?
Are you hungry for it? that would be, yeah, that would be my question. Whether, like, regardless of what the goal is, like, are you actually hungry for it? And if you're not, then cool, you know that you can have it another time when you are more hungry. But if you are hungry for it, okay, cool, have a little bit.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you're someone that you find yourself consistently struggling to resist the quote unquote treats that are in the staff room, it might be a sign that maybe you're restricting generally, or your relationship with these foods maybe is not necessarily very healthy or happy, in the sense that if you're labeling these foods as bad or telling yourself you shouldn't have them, of course, the more you're going to want to have them, and perhaps finding yourself in that kind of cycle of trying to mentally restrict, but then failing, then overeating, the typical then that mentality, I've ruined it now, might as well have more and go back and have more. So I would just encourage, and I'm sure you're doing that work with, this question is from Georgia's client, to understand perhaps what is causing the struggles there in the first place. And we spoke about unconditional permission just now, and big part of that is removing those restrictions, to know that you have the power to choose to have those foods whenever you want. So why have them when you're not feeling hungry, or when it's not going to meet your needs, when you know you can go to the shop and buy them at any time, essentially.
So I 100% agree with everything you just said, but I would also like to add a different perspective of donuts are great. And if someone's brought in a donut, you could not be restricting at all, but you still want the donut because it's delicious, and there's no big deal of having that sometimes. But again, looking at honouring your health and being like, okay, well, is a donut every day supportive of my health goals? Potentially not. Okay, so what's going to make me feel best? What will my future self thank me for? And parent yourself. Practice some delayed gratification. Like, you don't need to have it all the time, and show yourself that fiercer side of self-compassion if it is just a case of habit or want. And have alternatives. When I used to prep, when I was lecturing, and I worked in a nutrition department where people loved food and loved bacon, it was wild, the kind of incredible food that was in that staff room. And at that point, I didn't have unconditional permission to eat. I was on an extreme diet. I couldn't, if I ate cake, then it would really throw off my, like, I would be starving because I couldn't fit my other food into my macros. And it wasn't great. So I had alternatives. And again, this is going to be dependent on your goals. I'm saying this really mindful of our listeners, but if you've got a good relationship with food and you're dieting, you're going to need some alternatives. Have like low calorie hot chocolate, or like, I used to love peppermint and licorice tea, or like snacks that are satiating for you, vegetables, fruit, things like that you can have that are not going to completely that are not going to massively take you over your calorie intake. I mean, a piece of cake, if you're on a fat loss goal, is not going to do anything either. Like, and again, it's not no big deal at all. But again, I'm saying this mindful. If you have disordered eating habits and a poor relationship with food and you're working on unconditional permission to eat, having a licorice tea instead of Susan's cake in the staff room is a foolish idea. So you really need to think about, okay, where am I in my relationship with food? But having alternatives really helpful, and having a plan in place of like, okay, well, if Susan brings in cake, then I'll have something, I'll have this in the cupboard, or I'll have this instead, or then I'll wait an hour, and if I still really want it, then I'll have it. Having that implementation intention in your head first, that if then strategy, and being really comfortable with that intention that you set for yourself in advance can be super, super helpful. Okay, thank you so much for your questions. Thank you both so much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.